Integrity is worthless if there is not the accompanying element of accountability in it. Another way of saying this is accountability is like the critical currency in the market of integrity. You need accountability for your integrity to show its worth and its value. Let's talk a little bit about what accountability is in the first place. Accountability comes from the Latin word, which means to compare or to count. And computare is the Latin word. Basically, it meant counting responsibilities that one was entrusted to in their care. And so that's where the origin for accountability comes from. And basically, it just means how you take responsibility for the consequences of scenarios or situations that have happened in which you were involved. Accountability is different from responsibility in that responsibility is task oriented. You've got things that you're accountable for when you're giving a responsibility, but accountability happens in the aftermath of scenarios that have occurred in which you are trying to attend to and take responsibility for how things have transpired. A really critical question that I came across was, why do we use the word accountability only in a negative sort of a sense? In essence, why does accountability seem to come across as having to do with like when someone's in trouble and they needs to take responsibility of their actions? Why can't accountability also be used in the same way as when they do good, like when they do amazing stuff? That's also a form of taking accountability. At the end of this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about that point there and why it seems to be used in a more negative context. But first, let me just give you a bird's eye view of where we're going to go in this video here. We're going to go in we're going to follow the sequence of how accountability comes to be expressed in the context of one practicing and pursuing their integrity. So accountability isn't where we necessarily start off with, but it's one of those components that comes along the way in the midst of our progress through pursuing and implementing integrity in our lives. And I want to flesh out a little bit of how that looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about the consequences that arise, that give the opportunity for integrity to be on display. We'll talk about the motivations of why one would want to step into that space of pursuing integrity, especially when they're trying to grow in it. And then we'll see how the work of accountability comes into that mix and the outcomes after accountability has been engaged. So let's start off a little bit with some of the consequences of what happens in scenarios. Now, as human beings, we have outlined in the past that we are not perfect and we were never made to be perfect. It's an interesting thing how we often try to live life as if we are perfect and that there's nothing wrong with us, and that we can kind of put forth that image that we have everything well put together, when in reality, every single one of us makes mistakes along the way on a daily basis. There's not a day that I have been successful at being a perfect human being. And I've tried in the course of my life. I would devote days where I was thinking, today's the day that I'm not going to make any mistakes at all. I'm going to just be on point. I'm going to do everything just perfect. And there's nothing that I'm going to bring that's going to be of disrepute. I'll be flawless today. And I have yet to live one of those days. So this brings me to the point that I believe as human beings, we are messy, we are imperfect. And the quicker we're able to acknowledge this fact, the quicker we're able to start having expectations that are reasonable of ourselves and of those around us. So if we are by nature not perfect, but imperfect, and if we make mistakes on a daily basis, each and every one of us is ripe for opportunities to take accountability for our contribution in various settings and scenarios that we find ourselves in. But here's some of the consequences that transpire for those who refuse to take the opportunity to practice accountability even as they implement and pursue their integrity. One of those is a loss of trust and credibility. You don't have much of a name in your community or those around you because you have not been able to build a momentum, a consistency of trust that leads towards being seen and perceived as credible. Secondly, there's damaged relationships that can ensue from not taking ownership and taking responsibility for your actions, especially when things go wrong. It seems always so easy for us to navigate socially when things are going well. However, it is a totally different experience when things are going in a challenging trajectory and we feel like there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of strife and there's a lot of conflict in the air. It's then that we see especially the dismantling and the denigration of relationships that we have and care for. Another element or consequence is that it increases the stress and anxiety due to the unresolved issues and conflicts we have, not only with ourselves, but with those around us that we're in community with, whether in a professional capacity or in a personal. There's that increased and heightened sense of stress and anxiety that weighs heavy on us. There's also a loss of reputation and damage to our personal brand. We all have a personal brand and how we're presenting ourselves and how we're perceived. For some, they're known as the patient ones. Others may be known as the ones that fly off the handle at the least provocation. For some, they're considered the really kind ones or the ones who are great listeners or whatever it is. We have a brand that we're putting forth. And that brand, that personal brand, suffers a significant hit. Another way of saying it is our reputation takes a hit and we feel the effects of that as well. Furthermore, there's increased likelihood of repeating mistakes from our past when we don't take the opportunity to be accountable for and own some of our contributions in certain scenarios and outcomes. There's a likelihood that we're going to keep on repeating those mistakes because we've never taken the ownership to acknowledge and then learn, how am I going to try and figure this out in a different way? How can I have a different experience from last time that I had this experience? And so with this lack of taking accountability, we're finding ourselves more and more prone to be in this space where we are repeating past mistakes and failures. Moreover, there's a loss of respect and admiration of those that we care for. Again, because of lack of consistency, we continue to not take ownership of the things that are very obvious to everyone, except we're choosing to stick our heads in the sand like an ostrich and be oblivious or ignorant of our part that we have to take account for. And then finally, there's also the increased likelihood of that tension and conflict that is going to be your constant companion when you are just trying to figure out, why is my world so tense? Why do people around me seem on edge? Why is it that I just don't feel like I can sense, sort of settle and release? It's because of this element that we're refusing to take accountability and grow to be better versions of ourselves. The real paradox here is the more that we feel that we can ignore those things that we should be taking accountability for, the more we think we're going to experience freedom because we're ignoring it. But the reality is we're increasing a mountain load of tension and a mountain load of stress and anxiety on our shoulders because we're dealing with a lot of undealt stuff with, and we're still trying to stumble our way forward. What really is the matter of fact really is that when we release all of these things by taking accountability for them and facing the consequences and walking through what it takes to make things right again, the more we're able to start experiencing freedom from tension, experiencing freedom from the anxiety, because we're releasing all these stuff. We're releasing all these things that we're trying to ignore. And so that's a really critical component. So those are some of the consequences of what happens when we refuse to take accountability in our lives, even as we try to become individuals who are living by integrity. Let's move to some of the motivations that would compel one to say, all right, I'm done with experiencing these negative consequences of not taking ownership and accountability. What do I need to do to start a different pathway here? What I've been doing has not been working. What can I do now in transitioning to something different? Here's what you can consider doing by way of motivations. We've touched on the consequences now. Let's move on to motivations. Some of the motivations are as follows. You are desperate. You actually are getting to a point in your personal existence where you require honesty and transparency with yourself foremost and with those around you. You're done with trying to be ignorant of those things that you should be taking accountability for, and you want to face yourself as you truly are. You're tired of putting on this story in front of you that you have done nothing wrong. And instead, you're beginning to acknowledge that there may be a different story that resonates more with what is truth. And that requires this sense of honesty and transparency that you desire to experience for yourself, so that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're saying, okay, I'm seeing myself for who I truly am, and I'm ready to acknowledge and take ownership of those things that are on my responsibility going forward, really critical. It starts off at this place where you require honesty and transparency first and foremost with yourself, and then with those around you. Secondly, it requires setting and keeping high standards. You realize that the way you've been engaging so far, the obvious thing that you're starting to acknowledge now, that where we started off this video, is that you're not perfect and you never were made to be perfect, and you can stop trying to be perceived as perfect. It's not helpful for you to try and give this presentation that you have nothing wrong with you, because that's not reality. You're ready to finally consider and say, I'm probably not where I want to be, but I'm ready to acknowledge where I'm at right now. And even as I acknowledge where I'm at, I can still aim for something more. I want to aim for something more in my existence. I want to aim for something more by way of what I expect from myself. Here's where I'm at right now. I'm one who lacks this, lacks honesty, for example, or I'm one who is very violent, or I'm one who is, stick whatever vice you have here. I'm one who is X, Y, or Z here, but how can I be A, B, C over here? How can I strive for something more? And that requires setting and then pursuing to keep some high standards. That's a natural progression. As you're being honest with yourself, you're saying, here's where I'm really at right now, but here's where I strive to be. How can I make that progression through towards a higher standard? And then there's commitment to being reliable and dependable. This is one of the key elements of what it means to be accountable, is you are ready to take ownership. You're ready to take stock of things as they really are. You're practicing to be reliable and to be dependable, so that when you say something, you are going to be believed by others, that you're actually going to do what it is you're going to say. Furthermore, it's willingness to speak up when something seems off, especially when it's that scenario that you were describing earlier, where something just doesn't fit right. Maybe it's the way someone said something, maybe it's the atmosphere in which you're walking into, but something is just like, a bit of a mess here. And so you're able to identify that, and you're able to speak up saying, I want to take accountability. I'm not sure if I've contributed to this general ethos, but something seems to be off. Is there something that I said, for example, that offended you or hurt you? Or so this is one of the things that I do in my context when something seems to be off with someone that I'm interacting with. Maybe they're just a little bit closed off. Maybe they're a little indifferent. I just want to explore the options and see, is there something that I'm unaware of that I could benefit from knowing? And so I'll usually open up by trying to take accountability, saying, there seems to be a bit of tension here. I'm not sure if my perception is correct, or if you feel the same thing. If there's anything that I've done, I would love to know about it. Would you be willing to share with me, for example, ways that I may have said something or done something that discouraged you or hurt you? I would like to take ownership for that, but it begins with me asking. It begins with me offering up and saying, is there something I can take account for? So being willing to speak up when something's off, that takes courage. That takes massive courage to be able to acknowledge it and to address it, and to also be willing to be available if there's something that you're needing to take accountability for that you may not know heretofore. And then finally, there's also being consistent in the values, even when it's tough. In the values that you want, the standards that you're aiming for up here. Sometimes as you're trying to progress in becoming a better version of yourself, there is going to be consequences that you're signing up for as well that are painful. Consequences where you're like, oh, this is going to be so difficult. I'm not sure I have what it takes to be able to walk through that dark place, but I may experience loss, I might experience pain, I might experience some significant cost to myself personally. And then that's when the rubber really hits the road, dear friend. It's the question then of, are you still committed to aiming for something higher, even though there may be significant personal cost along the way? Really critical question to ask. Are you willing to stick through with the cost to yourself personally so you can grow to be something better? I hope you are willing to step up, because that's part of what this commitment to walking with integrity in relation to accountability signifies, and that is that we're willing to step up even when we are going to be affected personally in a way that we're not happy about. That's just part of the cost of what we do in engaging the way that we do in pursuing integrity. So if you are enjoying what you're hearing and listening to so far, if you're resonating in some way, I would love for you to subscribe to this channel, because what I'm doing is I am collating a community of those who are intentional in pursuing integrity in their lives, and in so doing, inspiring others around them to also do likewise. I'm often encouraged when I see others who are pursuing becoming a better version of themselves, and this is impossible unless you commit yourself to this path of walking with integrity. Integrity is that currency that enables one to have the sense of credibility, the sense that they're living life on purpose, the sense that they are willing to engage in an honest and truthful way that enables others to say, yes, I feel safe around this person because I know what to expect. I want to be around those kind of people. And if you are resonating with this, I would love for you to join this community and interact as well, because I want to be inspired by your pursuit, even as I'm also pursuing the same end of being an individual of integrity. That's why we call this the Inspiring Integrity platform here, because we want to see more of this. But if you're enjoying it, please do subscribe as I keep on progressing into the work category. Here's where the work comes in now. If you've been willing to acknowledge your consequences of actions or lack thereof in taking accountability for things that you are responsible for, if you're secondly willing to have the right motivations internally for why you're pursuing taking accountability through the vehicle of integrity, here's what is before you by way of opportunities. This is like the work part. We've talked about the theoretical part. We've talked about the emotional part here. This is how we feel. This is what's driving us. You're doing this not for others, but for yourself. You're doing it in a way that because you want to grow to be a better version of yourself. You want to be able to speak with courage and honesty, even as you maintain the pursuit of what is better, even at personal cost. Here is where the rubber hits the road with the work that is before you practically. Number one, it's really at the heart of it, taking ownership for the actions and the consequences that result that you are responsible for. So remember, the key difference between accountability and responsibility is responsibilities are task-oriented. Here's what you have by way of jobs to do. So you have that outlined. You're at work, for example. Here's your responsibilities for the day. You're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And you say, okay, done X, Y, and Z. And that's your responsibilities. Taking accountability, though, is different, because sometimes in the midst of fulfilling responsibilities, things happen where it doesn't quite happen the way you were hoping it would, for example, and things may go off track. Or maybe it's because of negligence on your part, or maybe it's because of whatever else, but you're contributing in some way to the course of planned sequences going off schedule. Taking accountability is saying, all right, I'm the one responsible. I'm willing to invest in getting us right back on track again. That's what being accountable at the heart of it means. It means taking ownership for your actions and their consequences in the midst of scenarios and situations that arise. The alternative is what you did before, what we've all done before, and that is just to say, I didn't do it, and you hope that someone else takes the fall for it, or that it'll be ignored or forgotten, or something along the lines. So it's taking ownership for the actions and the consequences that you've contributed to a certain scenario. It's admitting to your mistakes and taking steps to correct them. So it's not only sort of taking ownership, but it's also actively admitting, saying, I was wrong in this. I'm going to own that. I'm going to own that because of the first and foremost premise that we began this video on, that we've covered a couple of times, saying that we were never made to be perfect. Our existence, it is impossible for our existence to include the option of perfection. There is no perfect human being, is there? There is no perfect human being. We would all acknowledge this, I believe, that there's no perfect human being, and yet we continue to try and push this facade of perfection as we try to engage with the world around us. And therein we're practicing more and more dishonesty with ourselves and with those around us. Why not just practice a little bit of honesty when we say, I goofed up on this one here. I'm willing to take ownership for that. And I'm also willing to take responsibility for the actions that have contributed and their consequences. But it first of all begins with admitting to the mistakes that we've done and taking the appropriate steps to correcting them. This is just an honest progression in saying, I'm going to own my humanity. I'm going to do it in a way that I'm not denigrating myself. I'm not putting myself down saying, oh, you're worthless because you can't do this properly. No, it's none of that. It's more along the lines, excuse me. It's more along the lines of saying, how can I take ownership of the things that I'm responsible for? Because as a human being, I'm a processing growth. I'm one who's continuing to evolve and change and hopefully get better. And that's what we're aiming for here. And we don't get better unless we admit our mistakes and we take the necessary actions to correct them. And that's part of what it means, again, to take ownership for your actions and the consequences. And then it's also about not only taking ownership and admitting our mistakes, but it's also reflecting on and recognizing the impact that our actions have had on others and taking that responsibility as well. For example, let's say you walked into a room where your friend was and they didn't realize you were there and you scared them by accident. They got scared. And in that process, part of it, maybe even though you didn't mean it, it's saying, hey, I did not intend to scare you and I apologize for that. I can see it's impacted you and you're kind of like uncertain now because you're like spooked, if you will. That's just a simple example there, but it's taking an awareness of how your actions have also impacted others. So it's all about admitting our mistakes, taking ownership for our actions, and recognizing that our actions do have impacts on that's a funny sentence. Our actions do have impact on others. That's what I'm trying to say there. And so that's a really important component. So this is like the practical side of taking accountability. I've explained it. I'm not meaning for this to sound simplistic. It's not simple. It takes a lot of courage to step into this space here and to put oneself forward saying, I'm going to take ownership. I'm going to admit my mistake here. I should have said something. I should have done something and I didn't. So that's on me. I'm committed to taking the correct steps to I'm willing to take the correct steps to making this better. So you're taking ownership for your actions and the consequences, and then you're also reflecting on the way your actions have affected those around you. How have my actions affected those? Sometimes it's visible. Other times you have to ask and get some more intel, and that's another appropriate process, especially in this progress of trying to do the right thing. Let's talk a little bit about the outcome. The outcome of taking accountability. Here are some of the things you can anticipate as you walk through this corridor in the mansion of integrity that's called accountability. This corridor includes these outcomes that you can anticipate. One, it's being open to the feedback and criticisms, especially in relation to how you can improve the way you interact and engage. A big thing we said about integrity is integrity makes sense when you are thinking of yourself in community. It does not make sense when you have no community around you. If you're the only person in the world, who cares? Your actions impact no one. You can do whatever you want. You can have whatever value system, and integrity ceases to mean anything. But integrity does mean something when you're in community. And so this is where, as you learn to take accountability for your actions, you're being open to the feedback and criticism from those around you. You're making yourself available saying, hey, I already own that I'm not perfect. I'm willing to get some feedback from you, especially in relation to how my actions could go in a different trajectory where I could do better, where I could engage better, where I can connect better, where I could participate better with those that I'm in community with. And that includes being willing to receive feedback and criticism from them so that you can get to be better in the way that you are experiencing and progressing in your attendance to being accountable. And it also means that you're beginning to build credibility and trust with others. The reality is that they already see how messy you are. They see your inconsistencies. They have spent time with you long enough to know your weak points. And it's an evident dishonesty when you pretend that you don't have them, because the reality is they already see them. They already know. And it lends a lot more credibility. It lends a lot more trust in your trust bank when you're willing to be able to own up to it. And they're like, yeah, we already know. We've already seen this in your life. And now that you are ready to acknowledge it, that's a point in your favor because you're willing to now be honest in a way that everyone already knows and is familiar with. And then furthermore, not only is it building trust and credibility with others, but additionally, you're also willing to learn from the mistakes and use them as opportunities for growth and further development. This is a critical way of how we grow, is we find ourselves in community that is enabling, a community that it enables us to move to be a better version as they kind of walk alongside us, as they point things out that may be in our blind spots, in our hindsight, if you will. This is a fantastic way for us to grow to be much better versions of ourselves when we actively, listen carefully, when you actively offer yourself to the input of others, so that you can discernibly hear and receive feedback and criticism from them of how you can become better. They are more than willing to step in and say, yes, we're more than happy to let you know how you are still struggling. And if you're able to receive that feedback, not with defensiveness saying, that's not true, but instead with an openness that says, let me consider that. Let me see if I can work on this. Let me see how I can identify with what it is that you're observing and experiencing from me. If we're willing to be open to at least receiving it and then considering it and saying, how can I now use this in my arsenal to become from here to up here? How can I continue to grow better? This is a fantastic involvement of community in your life. Now you have to be discerning with this part here, because you can't just open yourself up to everyone. Who are the people I'd be asking in your life who you trust, that when they're going to give feedback, they're not doing it out of the wrong motives, but they're doing it out of the right motives. That they're not only giving you areas for criticism and complaint perhaps, but they're also willing and ready to identify areas where you're doing really well as well, because there's the two components there. There's the encouragement, but there's also the critical feedback that is necessary. So it's an awesome opportunity for personal growth and development, but that takes some serious growing into maturity for you to be able to say, I can hear and receive feedback without taking it personally, that they're saying I'm someone who is not worthwhile. That's where most of us, I think, struggle, is we say, I can't hear that from this person, because that's what we hear when people give feedback, is that they're rejecting us, that they're putting us down, that they're criticizing us so that they can rip us apart, instead of hearing it in a different vein of saying, how can I listen to this from these individuals and then benefit from it so that I can even become better? How can I use this as a tool in my arsenal to become a better version of me? Really critical. I'm saying this in a very simple talk here, but it's far more difficult to walk it out. If you have had experience with, or if you still even struggle with receiving feedback, or if you perceive it as critical and you don't like it, let me know in the comments. What is it that drives that feeling for you? Is it a feeling of being insecure, that you're not good enough? Is it that you feel that they don't like you? Like, what is it that drives that feeling for you, even when you're on the receiving end of feedback from others? What is it that gives you that response of like saying, ooh, this does not feel good? I'd love to hear some of your comments and maybe engage and interact with you a little further. Perhaps I can do a video on that in some point in the future, but I'd love to hear some of your comments on that. So here's the sequence that we've walked through. We've started off with the consequences over here of what happens when we refuse to take accountability. We've moved into the motivations for why we'd want to engage accountability and to see that being actualized in our personal lives. And that flows right into the work that's necessary and to happen on a practical level in engaging in the work of taking accountability. How do we do that? And then we finally finished now on the outcome of what all this looks like when we are seeing the response to those that we're trying to be accountable to, especially as they're interacting with us and giving us feedback and so on, and how we can receive that. I started off though with a reflection about, why does accountability seem to have sort of this negative sense to it? Like, we hear the word accountability and some of us have just a light sweat that comes on because you're like, oh boy, I have to take ownership for something that went wrong, right? Why does accountability, or like we said that the root word for accountability was to count, or the Latin word computare, and that's to count for things that have happened in a scenario or a situation for which we're taking accountability for. But why does it have this negative sense in the way we use it culturally today? I think it could be used positively, although it's not understood that way very well. Yes, it's true that for most of us, when we hear the word accountability, we think something's gone wrong and I'm being asked to take ownership for my part in this. And that's not the comfortable part. It's not fun, but it's a process that we were just discovering and going through the process of here. But what happens when things also go good? What happens when our actions have brought something beautiful out in the scenario? Why don't we say, take accountability for that? Why does it seem to only work in the negative? I think it seems to only work in the negative because we have so attached these sense or feelings of like blame, of criticism or coercion, or these negative sort of feelings internally with this word accountability. And that's why whenever we heard accountability, we're like, ooh, someone's going to sweat this one out, as they have to go through taking accountability. Whereas in the positive category of accountability, we usually use different language like take the credit for this, which is a similar sort of a basis here. Taking the credit, you're the one who is stepping up and saying, I did that, and that's how we progressed or grew or experienced these good things. And that's when people usually are encouraged to take credit for their contributions, for example, in a certain scenario. But that's the word accountability applied positively, even though that's not why it's often used that way. So, my dear listener, where are you at in your process of taking accountability for things in your life? Scenarios that happen, situations that you find yourselves in. How active are you in taking the lead of pursuing accountability? This is an action that is self-motivated, that you have to do on your own part. You have to be the one driving this bus, if you will. And so as you consider your own experience in your life, for those who pursue this walk of integrity, accountability is a very close companion. It's a very necessary tool that you're going to be using often in your work on a day-to-day basis. And this is part of what you can't get by on your path towards integrity without. You need to learn accountability. It's extremely uncomfortable and scary for so many at the outset, but it's so necessary and so imperative that we practice and own it for ourselves. And so my encouragement to you would be, if you are not practicing accountability, one really important place to begin is with acknowledgement, saying, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm willing to own that. That's an honest acknowledgement there. I'm willing to acknowledge to myself, I'm not perfect. And if that's a really important starting place by way of acknowledgement, what does it look like for you to be able to own that in the social settings you're in, saying, if I'm not perfect, here's how I contribute in a way that I need to take accountability for. Here's ways that I can grow from this level over here to this level over here. There's such amazing freedom that one experiences in their progression to becoming better versions of themselves. It's like, if you will, consider the pianist who is so accomplished. I watch those who play piano and I wish I had that dexterity, that ability. They seem so free. They can just sit down and start plunking away on those keys and something beautiful comes out. And when I try to do it, I don't have the same freedom. That only came about because they applied themselves to the hard work of theoretical work over and over with practice. Eventually they started getting this groove and this beautiful ability. Consider, even if you will, those who have other skill sets, the mason, consider like the IT guy. Like, there's so many things that people have tremendous skill in, but that didn't come just without practice. It came with a lot of practice and a lot of application of hard work to get to that proficient level. And so it is with our walk towards integrity. It becomes easier over time, but it's very difficult at the early outset, but it's still so critical. There's no shortcut to this. You can't sort of like jump or skip a step. It means that you have to walk through this corridor of accountability to be able to get to this beautiful mansion of integrity. And it's an amazing place to be. The freedom, like I said, that I experience in life in general is it's so difficult to describe, and it's something that I'd rather you experience, even as I encourage you to join me in this pathway. So if you haven't already done so, dear listener, thank you for listening to the end of this video. I'm going to include a couple of videos over here and here. These are two of my favorite ones that I have so far. The contrast, the the criteria for good quality integrity that one can enjoy and bad quality integrity. This is probably a good place to start in your consideration of this walk towards what I'm striving to inspire you towards, and that's living a life of integrity and inspiring others around us to do so, and in some way to impact our world in a significantly positive way. If you're interested in joining along, I would love for that. I would love to get to know you on a more personal basis in the comments and to start building this community where we can inspire and encourage each other, because let me tell you, we weren't made to this on our own. We weren't made to this solo. This is something that we want to commit to together, and it's far more rewarding that way. But for the time being, I want to say thank you for joining and listening, and I appreciate you guys, and I will see you on the next video. Bye for now.